What's up, guys? Welcome to another Zygrene Car Talk. We're here with Kevin from the Jabal and Cars YouTube channel.
What's up, guys?
And this is going to be my usual end of year podcast where we sum up kind of how the year went for each of us in our respective channels, what we've learned about ourselves, what we've learned about various cars that we've driven, and also just ranking some of the most impressive and least impressive. And we'll throw in a couple of special categories in there today. Cars that we've driven. So let's get started with some of the easy ones. Just straight off the bat, what are the top 3 most impressive cars you've driven this year? And obviously both of our channels are focused more on driving dynamics, so that's how we'll be judging the cars, not how they are as daily drivers and whatnot. So I'll let you start off.
I think we have the same, because we have our own score sheets. Mine's called the Jabal and Cars Driving Index, yours is the Zygrene Performance Index, and we categorize cars based on very similar metrics. So I haven't prepared my list, but let me look at my spreadsheet.
I'd be shocked if the top 5 or 6 cars you drove this year were not the top of your sheet right now.
McLaren 750S, that's number 1.
Yep.
That was driven this year. 718 Spider RS.
Yep.
That's number 2. Number 3, we drove last year. Number 4 this year is...
What was number 3?
My number 3 is a 718 Cayman GT4 RS.
GT4 RS.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0.
What a special car that was.
Yeah. I think that was the highest value car we drove too.
Yes, and we'll get to that too because we're going to do the most expensive cars. So those are your top 3, right?
Yeah, I think driving that McLaren was eye-opening because McLarens, you hear about the resale value and you're concerned about the ownership experience, reliability and such. And then you drive one and you realize that
why people still take on that risk.
Yeah, because a Porsche at the end of the day, you start off with a 911 and you build up from that.
Yeah.
The GT cars are still underneath a 911, whereas the McLaren, it's like underneath the 750S is a 720.
Yeah.
Adding from that, you're already starting off at a carbon fiber monocoque chassis.
Yeah.
And the suspension was probably the most impressive of any
hydraulic
vehicle
suspension
I've ever driven. It was wild. That was a really standout vehicle.
Yeah. I just because that was also my number 1 this year, I want to just agree with you in that. Yeah, it's really eye-opening because when you drive cars that are based on lesser models like the 911, the Cayman. Don't get me wrong. I would love to own a GT3 one day, like a 991.2. That's still kind of out of all the cars I've driven and, given current market values, that's still the one that I would most realistically buy for myself.
I luckily was able to drive 3 different 991.2 GT3s this year in like the last...
Including on track.
3 months, just on track.
Oh, just on track.
3 different ones on track. Like some were stock, some were modified, but yeah, amazing car. Both on street and on track.
But even then, you go from that to a 750S and... you didn't get the opportunity to do this, but I drove the 675 LT like maybe a month or a month and a half before the 750S. That was my first McLaren experience outside of the 570S, which I drove several years ago, and that was in very not ideal road conditions.
Right.
But the 675 LT was so mind-blowing that it completely changed my kind of opinion on McLaren. Not that I had a strong opinion to begin with, but it was just incredible. Like the carbon monocoque chassis combined with the hydraulic suspension, that combination and the hydraulic steering.
The hydraulic steering it made me reconsider steering actually.
Me too.
Because it was so good. You had all the feedback with less of the chatter from like the Elise.
Yes.
The Elise is hyperactive and I love that.
Yeah.
And that to me was a 10 out of 10 steering. And then I drove the 750S and I was like, oh, the Elise is actually not a 10 out of 10. This is a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Because now you get all the feedback, the loading, the important information through the wheel, but not the extra chatter and noise.
Yeah, all the noise gets removed.
More signal, less noise.
Exactly, yeah, that's how I would describe it too. And then obviously like the power is insane. Like the engine's not the most emotional thing in the world. It doesn't make the best sound and it does have a lot of turbo lag, but it still revs high. It's a top end motor. It's still congruent with the car. But driving that, the only thing I wish it had that was different would be like a super high revving naturally aspirated engine.
If it had a naturally aspirated engine, I was just about to say that, perfect.
Even if it
would
had,
be
say,
perfect.
like 50, 100 horsepower less, I would still take that.
Even more than 100 power less, I would probably take that.
Really? Okay.
Give me 200 horsepower less, and that's still a plenty quick car, and just give me that immediacy of naturally aspirated and
Yeah.
the sound, and that would really
Imagine a
do it for me.
458 Italia engine in that car.
Dude, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so clearly we both are huge fans of the 750S. Number 2, 17 Spider RS. Tell me about that.
Why don't you do this one first?
Okay, so going into that review, I had a preconceived notion of how it would feel based on the GT4 RS, which I think we both drove last year.
Yeah.
And the same owner, by the way.
What a legend.
What a legend, UA. Shout out to UA. He's got a deposit on a GMA T33. So if he takes delivery of that in a couple years,
Insane.
you guys may see some fun Cosworth sounds on our channels. But
Spicy.
so the GT4 RS, because he actually loaned me that car for a few days. I just drove it around the street and in the canyons. In the canyons, it was fantastic, as you'd expect. But on the street, extremely compromised driving experience. The intake sound was like ear-splittingly loud, and then the suspension, even in the softest mode, it was a very harsh and jiggly ride.
It's clearly a track-oriented
vehicle.
from the
correct.
factory.
So that's kind of what I was expecting going into the Spider RS review, except I did read that, the suspension has been tuned a bit more for the street. But I was like, knowing Porsche, it's an RS product, it's still going to be very, very firm and harsh. It really was a night and day difference. Huge difference. Like all of a sudden, it just felt like a proper road car that was like tuned to the absolute max of what you'd want in a road-focused car. Whereas the GT4 RS really is like 80% track focused, 20% street, I would say.
Yeah, I do think that the suspension tuning transforms that vehicle such that it actually ranks higher on, I
Same
believe,
here.
both of our spreadsheets.
Yeah, that's right.
For that reason, because the suspension tuning, I think that was the main difference between the two.
I think I gave it just like a half a point higher in handling. Yeah.
Yeah, the tuning on that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Because the GT4 RS is punishing, and the Spider RS, I think because of the open top, did we have the top up or down? I don't remember.
We drove it with the top up, but we had like the side window things down. Yeah.
So it was still loud, but I think it was also less ear piercing.
Yeah, it was less of like an echo chamber in there.
Yeah, so I think that also makes it a little bit more livable, because on track, the GT4 RS, I wouldn't mind that sound.
Yeah.
But I think on the street, for me, it would get old. I would get a headache, and my ears would be ringing from just redline pulls constantly in the GT4 RS.
So like when I track my Integra, I wear the helmet, and it's like, damn, like it mutes some of the sound.
Yeah.
In the GT4 RS that we tracked, I was actually thankful that I had the helmet.
Oh, for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
And that goes both ways, because cars like the GR86, the engine is pretty soft. So some people say that they have to turn on the artificial cabin noise, otherwise they can't hear the
I had
engine.
to. Yeah, I didn't want to turn it off because otherwise I couldn't hear it.
I personally had no issues, but I can see how people would want to keep that on. I found the audio very unpleasant on that car, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right. Okay, so what's your number 3?
Number 3 from this year is the GT3 RS 4.0. That was a legendary car.
Yeah.
We drove it on the right roads too, more high-speed sweepers.
Right.
And the car, like, compared to the 3.8, the main thing is that it felt a little bit more nervous. It felt almost a bit twitchy, right? It's like I would love to try this on the racetrack where you can use more of that downforce, that stability.
God, imagine tracking an RS 4.0.
I mean, that'd be an incredible experience, and the owner would have to. I don't know how many people are actually willing to do that, given the price and because the used value for those is like $600K to $1 million.
I think they've gone up since we drove them. They're like probably 700 to 800 now.
Wild. So yeah, luckily our insurance covers up to $1 million, but once we start, if it starts going higher than that, then
we're gonna have to up our policy.
Yeah. That was a very incredible experience, and I think that compared to.
How did you? I'm really curious. How did you score the steering of that car versus the 750?
I was actually just looking at the steering right now. Compared to the 718 RS products, I think it has better steering because it has hydraulic. So I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
But the 750S was a 10 out of 10. The 997.2 was a 9. How about for you?
That's fair. Well, let's see, what did I score this? I gave the 750S a 10 out of 10 for steering. And RS 4.0, yeah, also a 9. So the only car I think, yeah, I think, yeah, it's a 9 because arguably the feedback is just as good in the RS 4.0 compared to the McLaren. But where it loses out a little bit, I think, is that on the on-center feel. In the older 997s, even the RS products, there's just that slight amount of vagueness on center. Whereas in the 750S, you just feel like the car wants its track, it wants to track straight.
Yeah.
And then every kind of like 5% more lateral G you put on the steering, on the front tires, you feel that in the wheel.
Yeah, I felt the 997 had great steering, but it still felt like an older gen in the sense that the amplitude of the feedback and the signal to noise ratio wasn't as refined as the 750 to me.
Yeah.
So the 750 had better signal to noise, higher precision, but then like the actual feedback and the weighting, it has such high resolution and high magnitude that you can't miss it. Whereas I feel like in the 997, it's there, but a lot of it is at a lower amplitude. And the signal to noise ratio, therefore, is not as, extreme. You get a little bit more noise and a little bit less signal.
I would agree with that. Also, I think I remember thinking, even with the Cup 2 tires, the load up behavior, I wish it loaded up a bit more in the corners. Where the 750, I could not find a single fault with it. It was just perfect.
I'm so grateful that I can talk and indulge my obsession with steering with someone fetishism. Because I feel like a lot of there's different flavors of car enthusiasm, and I remember I went to a car meet in Vegas and I told you the story, but talking about the steering of the 997 versus the 458 and such, some people were just like, but bro, what would you rather be driving, like a Ferrari or a Porsche? I was like, okay, never mind.
That's the kind of conversation this is going to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So
and I appreciate the viewers who are also down for these kinds of conversations.
100%.
Because obviously both of our channels are far more focused on the nuances of the driving experience rather than just like, hey, which one's faster in a straight line? So
we're very much niche. We have niche target audiences, but that not going to change that. That's our bread and butter. So that's your third car. My third actually was the 675 LT because that was my the first eye-opening McLaren experience that I had.
I haven't driven one.
The only reason, honestly, I ranked it below the 750S is because of the gearing.
Too long?
Yes, the 750 has a much shorter final drive, and so you actually on a public road you can actually get through second and third gear, whereas in the 675 you're basically just kind of fighting turbo lag in most places coming out of second gear corners, and then you get it to the top of second, you look at the speedo and you're like, I'm going to jail, and then that's kind of the experience.
So other than the gearing, how did those cars compare?
I thought they were very, very similar. I drove them on different roads, and the road I drove the 675 on was relatively unfamiliar to me, so that wasn't as ideal of kind of an experience to compare that against anything else I'd driven, unfortunately. But even then, it was also on PS4S tires, so that might have.
Versus Cup 2s on the
P0 courses on the Cup 2, on the 750, which is a much stickier compound. But even with the PS4S, the steering was just like telepathically good. So that was my top 3. How about top 3? We'll spend only a few minutes on this. Top 3 least dynamically impressive cars you drove this year. And this is not to, shit on the cars for any reason. I would expect fully, as reflected in my list, they're all cars that are not driving dynamics focused cars.
Yeah, so the very bottom on my list, I'm just looking for the 2024 driving dates, and then you guys can find both of our spreadsheets linked below.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the same spreadsheet that you guys would be looking at. Bottom one for me is Toyota Crown Signia, which I had as a press car. Obviously, that's not driving dynamics focused. Prius Prime is second to bottom, and I'm looking at just 2024. And then the third to bottom was the 1974 BMW 2002 Tii.
Oh, yes, the Tii.
I actually had really fond memories of driving the 2002 because back when I was in med school, actually, I was scrubbed in with this plastic surgeon who was a huge collector, and we were chatting about cars. And after we leave the hospital, going to the parking garage, he's like, "Hey, why don't you drive my 2002 to your car?" Oh. I had a little FRS at the time.
That's super cool.
So I drove for 5 minutes just through these low speed city streets, and I just remember being amazed because that was the first time I drove an old car.
Yeah, yeah.
You got this heavier steering and just like the sounds
the
and the
bus
noises,
wheel.
and I was like, oh my god, this is insane. This is so much fun.
Yeah.
And even the way that the clutch, the old school cars have this different feel.
Yeah.
So that was a fond memory I had, and I was very excited to drive it. And it still is a very cool car. But obviously, when you're comparing a technology that is 5 decades older,
Yeah.
it's not gonna stack up in terms of the actual dynamic competency compared to modern.
Because we're trying to be
vehicles.
objective in these scores, right? It's
Yeah.
not about like, oh, this is a fun, cool, quirky car. It's like
Yeah.
objectively, how do they compare?
I do have a emotionality score that I added
Right.
to capture some of that X factor, but
But it's only like 5 points max, right?
it's only 5
Yeah.
points, and like something like an Ariel Atom is a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is nowhere near that level of emotionality. It's still very fun, but by modern standards, is not as dynamically competent.
Right, right. So I'll mention my number one least dynamically impressive, which was the 2002 Lexus LS 430. I love that car. Don't get me wrong. It's, I think, for the amount of money you can find one for nowadays, with like, for a Toyota or a Lexus, what's reasonable mileage, which I would say is under 200K. It's such a great car. It's so comfortable, so refined, so spacious. It's a tank. It's got a V8, but in the canyons, it drove like shit. Like,
It's not what it's designed.
it's not what it's designed for. But even then, if you compare that to like a modern, flagship luxury sedan, the modern car objectively handles way better while still giving you that plush ride and the great interior, even if they're heavier and such. And I think that's actually a sign of just how far we've come in terms of being able to build cars or engineer cars that have a wide range of use cases. Back then, it was like, oh, you want a luxury car? We can give you a great luxury car, but here's the compromises that it comes with. It's going to be very floaty in the corners, like no adaptive suspension.
Yeah.
It's going to have that loose on-center steering feel, which is condition dependent, but still compared to a modern car, those older cars are nowhere near as capable all around.
Now you even have these big SUVs that are like the performance-oriented ones that can be plush, and then in their more aggressive track modes, you have the active sway bars and such.
Yeah,
Just like,
yeah.
totally flat cornering.
Like like one example would be like the Alfa Romeo.
Not the Stelvio, but the other one, right?
The Stelvio I thought was fairly impressive.
Levante.
Oh, Levante. I don't think I drove the Levante. Did you drive that?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
But
I thought even the Stelvio was pretty impressive because we drove it on the street and on the track, and it was pretty good in both.
Oh yeah, I agree.
In both situations.
I agree. Yeah, I'm curious to try driving that because that is their flagship.
Yeah.
Or their flagship SUV, I should say.
Yeah, no, that'd be interesting. All right, what's your number two?
I already went through.
Oh, you already went through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Prius Prime was also on my list, and that's actually the one on my list where I had higher hopes for it, not because
of the styling.
Because of the styling, and it looks so good. And I was like, man, if this thing handled well, like I would actually consider buying one.
The power bump is so welcome because my girlfriend right now is driving, I think, the prior gen Prius Prime, and oh my god, dude, like you floor the thing on the highway and it's like you cannot overtake.
Yeah.
And I think they added 100 horsepower, almost 100 horsepower.
Yeah.
In the new gen, and it looks so great. I mean, sure, you've compromised some of the usability in the rear.
Yeah.
With the roof line, but that thing just looks
such a cool car.
Fucking fire, man.
Yeah. Yeah. But it still drives like a Prius. It just drives like a Prius with more power. What you would expect.
It definitely drives sharper than my girlfriend's Prius.
Okay.
Like the steering ratio was faster than hers.
When did she get a Prius?
She's borrowing her parents' car.
Oh, okay.
While her car is having issues.
Got it. From an Audi to a Prius.
Used Audi problems.
Yeah. Okay. So the other car I had on my list was the BMW E24 Gen 635 CSI. Extremely cool car. You drove this too, right? Nathan's 635.
I have mine listed here, but I think my date driven was August of 2023. Did I put the wrong?
Maybe
I put the wrong date.
You know what? That might be my bad. I might have driven that because we drove it at the same time.
Yeah, I put a date driven on all my spreadsheet entries.
I guess I'll talk about it anyways. It's kind of similar to your impression of the 2002, but being this one being a newer car, right? Slightly newer. It's a little bit more dynamically impressive than a 2002, but it still has that same feeling of I'm driving an ancient car. Like the steering, there's like 10 degrees of dead zone on
Dude,
center.
yeah, it was massive.
Yeah.
It's disconcerting when you're trying to push a car, to 6/10 even. And
Yeah.
you're like, what's going on?
What's
with steering?
happening in the front? It's like you feel like you have to turn in about 2 seconds earlier than you actually want the car to turn.
I'm guessing that's because, the 5 Series, at least the M5s early on, this was not even M5, this is a 6 Series, right? But I'm guessing they also had recirculating ball rather than a rack and pinion. And that was probably like earlier days of it before they could dial it in, like in the E39.
In the E39, yeah.
So,
I'm not sure if this had recirculating ball, but that's what it felt like to me.
It felt like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was driven last year because I published a video on it September of last year.
Okay, fair. Okay, so that's the top 3 most impressive and least impressive dynamically. There's going to be some overlap in these next 2 categories, so let's just talk about the ones we haven't already delved into. But top 3 most expensive cars and just your general impressions of them, and do you think they're worth the money?
Go through your list because I think my list is going to be the same as yours, and I haven't dialed mine in.
Okay, so number 1 most expensive, as we mentioned earlier, the 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0. That was a major bucket list moment for me and one of the most memorable car experiences I've had of all time.
Shout out to Kevin.
Gentleman
and a scholar.
And to Jimmy, because we compared the RS 4.0 against Jimmy's RS 3.8 against Jimmy's other car, which is a GT3 RS 997.1.
Yeah, so he has 2 997s. One is the .1 GT3, one's the .2 GT3 RS.
Yeah.
So, and he also has 2 S2000s. I just love this guy.
And an NSX and a GT4.
Yeah, man. Great taste in cars, great collection.
But I had lost it after this RS 4.0 for the better part of a decade, right? It was in my top 10 list of like halo cars of all these cars that I've never driven before, never even sat in. So going into it, I definitely had sort of like rose-tinted glasses, if you will, but I also tried to be as objective about it as possible. And I think the fact that I got to drive, we both got to drive that next to those other 2 cars, that was an extremely important experience that we were able to have, because my takeaway at the end of the day was that the RS 4.0 still is the top dog, 997 generation of all time, not having driven a GT2 RS, so I can't say on that front. But when you compare the 4.0 to the 3.8, the difference in performance and feel and just call it overall fun factor, if I had to quantify it, I would say 3 to 5% better, but it's more than double the price. So it is truly one of those cars where you buy as a collector item, you drive it.
Only 3 to 5%? You don't think like
I would say
5 to 10?
The difference is that I felt, right?
Yeah.
First of all, the engine obviously makes something like 50 more horsepower. So you do feel that, but also it's geared quite long. Both cars are. So unless you have a really wide stretch of straight, like you don't it's not like, oh my God, this car is so much more accelerative, but there is a difference in sound.
Yeah, I was going to say the sound and the power, to me, and we can talk about the handling too, but I agree with you though, that they're very close. I would say like 5 to 10% for me personally.
Yeah, okay.
Of a increase, but does that justify the price difference?
It certainly doesn't, but it doesn't make me want one any less. The other difference in handling that I felt, and I'm trying to remember because you alluded to this earlier where you said the 4.0 had a more nervous kind of rear end feel to the 3.8. Why do I seem to remember it was the other way around for me? But where I noticed it was high speed, heavy braking. Like when I was, going quite fast, I won't mention the speed. And then I basically just slammed on the brake pedal.
Exactly at the speed limit.
Exactly at the speed limit. I slammed on the brake pedal, and there was a rear end squirm, which actually required me to do a little bit of oversteer correction, but I can't remember which one that was in.
I'm quite certain that was the 4.0.
Really?
Because we had this discussion during the review day about how each one was like a level up.
Yeah.
And I think in the review day, and I think in both of our videos, I think we overstated the difference between the 3.8 and the 4.0 because of that halo effect of the 4.0.
Yeah.
And we kind of hyped up and we were getting really excited in the videos. And I think after the fact, after we drove it and we're sitting down and grading them, then I think both you and I came to the same conclusion that, you know what, the 3.8 and the 4.0 were actually a lot closer than we may have given credit on the video.
Yeah.
Maybe in the video we said, hey, this is like 30% more, or 20% more, but in reality it's like 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 as an example.
Sure.
But the 4.0 was, I do remember that it was definitely more nervous than the 3.8. It was like a leveling up. We're like, oh yeah, each time they're leveling up in terms of like sharpness and how hardcore they are. And you see the difference from the .1 GT3 to the .2 RS.
That was a way bigger difference.
Really big difference.
Yeah.
And the first time I drove a .1 GT3, I was blown away. I mean, driving FRS GR86, cars like that in that price bracket up to the .1 GT3 even was a mind-blowing experience.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, quick little segue, kudos to the viewers, because this is a dream side hustle. Being able to drive these different cars and hopefully help you guys understand the driving experience to maybe inform you for your purchasing decisions.
Or if you're just a daydreamer like I am on many occasions. Yeah.
And it's just so amazing to try these different flavors, and maybe we'll get to this later, how our own preferences and ideas of cars have changed through that experience of driving cars. Because, in 2019, I thought my dream car was some kind of BMW, and now I don't think that. And my dream car is probably something very, very different than I would have imagined.
Definitely. Yeah, let's spend some time on that once we get through these lists here. So yeah, I think the RS 4.0, that was the top most expensive. Number 3 for me was the RS 3.8, which I think, I haven't looked at current values, but at the time we filmed, which was like early 2024, they were going for like 300 to 325-ish. So about maybe a little less than half the value of the 4.0. And then my number 2 was a 750S, which was just, as a new car, it was somewhere around like $400,000.
Yeah, and the question you asked earlier was, do we think that's worth the money? And because these cars are so out of my budget, it's hard for me to even really fathom. And maybe if I was worth $10 million, $20 million, maybe I would think differently.
Yeah.
I would say that the 911s, part of the ownership experience for a car that expensive, let's admit it, it's this terrible thing to even talk about. Like, it is resale value. So you buy one of those cars, you're going to get a lot more of that money back should you ever decide to sell it. Whereas with the 750S, you're going to take a depreciation hit. Yes.
That's such a good point. And let's just maybe spend like 1 minute, right? Talking about the 997 RS cars versus the 750S, because the 750S is essentially priced in between the RS 3.8 and the RS 4.0 if you buy it brand new. And as a driving experience, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think the 750S is still the top dog. Like, in terms of like just the sheer engineering marvel of it, even though it's not as, raw, visceral, kind of whatever you want to say.
But the amazing thing is that I love cars where they give you that communication without beating you up.
Yeah.
And the 750S actually gives you a crap ton of communication, both through the chassis and the steering and the brakes and everything, without beating you up. And whereas the 997s, they do beat you up, which is fine. You're going for a track car.
Yeah.
But that's really incredible what McLaren has done.
I agree. The suspension is extremely comfortable in the soft mode. But yeah, part of ownership, and when we talk about value, resale is a thing. Not everyone has unlimited budget. So when it comes down to it, Porsche GT and RS products have historically not only held value, but have appreciated dramatically. And not to say that that's going to continue indefinitely, but it probably is going to continue indefinitely because we're not getting cars like that anymore.
And they're being more and more restrictive. It's really annoying what they're doing for us consumers, in the sense that there's these wait lists, and you hopefully get this 992 GT3 or this RS, but it's very intelligent what they're doing from a business perspective. And I get it. I hate it because I would love, earlier I wanted a GT4, and they're like, yeah, good luck. Even for a GT4, right?
Yeah. So
it sucks as a consumer, but for the brand, for the prestige, a lot of these, Rolex is notorious for this too. It's because they're taking this path, they likely will continue to do it, and certain cars like the ST are gonna, those are gonna appreciate for sure.
Yeah.
And many of the other GT and RS products.
Agreed. Okay. You had the same list, right?
Same list. Okay.
Top 3 least expensive, and just our general impressions of those. I already talked about the LS430. the owner bought that car for $3,000. I don't think I've driven a car with a market value less than 3K in a very long time.
I didn't realize they're that cheap. How do you think that?
On average, they're not. He got a really good deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I met a gentleman in Vegas recently who also is dailing an LS, and his track car is an ISF.
Ooh.
That video's coming out soon. So how do you think that? How do you feel that it stacks up as a daily?
The LS430?
Yeah.
It's a big, heavy car, and it's a gas guzzler. Like you probably average in the 15 to 18 mile per gallon range. So from that perspective, it's a pretty shit daily. But at the same time, you're rolling around in the best that Lexus had to offer 2 decades ago. So there is like a cool factor there, right? It's a huge car. It's very soft. It's got very outdated tech, but there's just something about kind of the JDM like luxury kind of vibe that it just draws me in for some reason. And the part that's enticing is that you can have that experience for $5,000-$6,000. So even if the car broke down or whatnot, which it probably wouldn't because it's a Lexus, like you'd only be out like that amount of money rather than if you had a brand new one out of warranty.
Yeah, I don't know what the running costs are like, but just given Lexus reliability, I would assume it's far better than any German equivalent.
Yeah,
far better.
I think so. Yeah. So my second least expensive was the NC1 Miata, the low budget track build, the one that we drove in LA.
I loved that car. I mean, for the price, I think he said it was
it
12K all in.
12K all in.
For the vehicle plus mods.
Yeah.
And I would happily just pay 12K to have that experience because, I mean, on this channel and on many car review channels, it's these really expensive cars that are out of reach for many people, including us. These cars that we're talking about, 750S, RS products. And you just see how much fun and joy there is to be had at an $8,000 NC when you drop $4,000 in mods in it. And it's not going to look beautiful and it's not going to be the most impressive thing. You go on a date night or whatever, but that's not what it's about. It's about having fun behind the wheel and just pushing the car because slow car fast is always a good recipe.
Yeah.
So I loved that car.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So much fun.
It was a lot of fun. And it was eye-opening to see, comparing that one to the higher budget one. Obviously, the higher budget one was better in every sort of way, but at the same time, that doesn't detract from the lower budget one, because the lower budget one, you're still getting like 80+% of the experience, but at like half the price.
And it was also more raw and visceral in a way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what you're optimizing for.
Yeah, sure. And then my third car on the list was the the Volvo S60R. I don't remember the market value of that, but I think I found, because there's so few of them out there, but I think I did find one listed at like 8,000 or something like that. That was a really quirky car. I didn't know anything about it until I did like research the day before I drove it. And it's such a weird car because it's like this Swedish built, like they put a lot of emphasis on certain things that most consumers probably don't care about. So like I remember the suspension was like one of the early cars that had adaptive dampers where there's a very noticeable difference between the different settings. And then what else did it have? It had like these weird seats.
The seats were made from some special, like, I think English manufacturer that was well known for making these luxurious non-car seats and like regular just around your house chairs and such.
Yeah.
And the seats were very plush.
They were like it was like sitting on a couch essentially in your car. And it had that weird, like if you remember like the shift lever, it was a manual, but the base of the lever where you would expect to see like a leather boot or something was just this kind of like spherical piece of metal that kind of just like,
it was plastic,
but it kind of just like did that, and it was just like,
well, it rotated with you, so
it rotated with you, right?
If this is the actual gear shift, then the thing would be at the base and it would just rotate around, so that when you're moving it around, it makes it look like there's this nice
like a glow,
silver metallic-ish looking cover, but it would just rotate with it.
I don't know why I was so fixated on that. I was like, that's so cool. You don't see that in any other car.
Yeah.
All right, so what is your list?
Probably the same. I mean, I didn't drive the LS. I'm looking at my list right now. I don't keep track of the
market values.
the market
I don't
value.
either. I think I just kind of figured this out.
We can just skip
Yeah.
it. We can just keep
Okay,
going.
let's skip that. Let's get into something slightly more interesting. Cars you want to drive. This could be next year, in the next 10 years, whatever. Just cars that are on your bucket list that you want to experience. Like I mentioned, the RS 4.0 was on my list for the better part of a decade. Finally crossed that off, but I have a lot more cars on my list, and I'm sure you do too.
For me, there are three cars that have always stood out as Halo dream cars, and I think a lot of people in our age range are going to agree with these. The first one being McLaren F1.
Yeah.
I remember seeing one in person, actually not too far from here, near Blackhawk, one of those roads. Like, it's a very nice gated community, and I remember seeing one as a kid and being like, "Oh my god, this is insane!" Seeing it on the street in real life. I don't think I've ever seen one since on the street.
I've never seen one.
Yeah, they're quite rare, and given the value, people aren't driving them. Number 2 and number 3 would be LFA and Carrera GT.
Dang it.
Although I hear that the LFA, I've heard that the transmission takes a lot away from the experience because it's a single clutch.
Yeah.
And you just like you feel the age there, but I'm still, just because of that engine, especially, and the noise with that Yamaha tuned engine. Those are the top 3 for me.
Okay. I have the same 3, and I have a few others. NSX Type R. So that's been on my list for obvious reasons. Almost had an opportunity to drive an NA1R, I think a year or two ago, but that one fell through somehow. But now that people are actually importing them legally into the US, given the 25-year rule, it's getting more and more likely that, at some point I'll be able to drive one. So that's going to be an eye-opening experience, because obviously I've modified my NSXR or my NSX to kind of feel like, in my mind, kind of what maybe not a Type R would feel like, but kind of like a Type S, kind of like, more aggressive than a base NSX, but not all-out track weapon as well. So I'm just really curious to see what I've done in the aftermarket. How close can that get to like the best of what Honda could produce back in the day? So that's on my list. And then I have 3 cars also on my list.
Comparison, by the way.
Yeah, like mine versus.
Yeah.
That would be super
A proper
cool.
R.
I have 3 other cars on my list that are more kind of like, I think, realistic and probable for me to review in the near future. That includes a 992 GT3 RS. Obviously, that's still an insanely special and expensive car, but given that I've built up quite a large list of Porsche GT and RS cars that I've driven recently, I think it's pretty realistic to expect to be able to drive one of those at some point. C8 ZR1 Corvette, the 1,000 and whatever 60-something horsepower car. We've driven the base C8 Z51, the Z06. So, once more people start picking up the ZR1, I think it's realistic that we'll get to drive that. And then R34 GTR. And the reason I say that, because I've already driven one. I drove a stock one in Japan. It was a Omoren car, but it was super high mileage. Not that impressive because it was stock, kind of worn out. But my friend imported, I forget which trim, but it's like a proper, like, modified R34, and he just took delivery of it, and he's just getting everything done before he's going to let me drive it, and that's local in the Bay Area, so that's going to be really special.
Amazing. Yeah, now that you mentioned those other cars, I haven't driven any GTR. R34, R33, R32, R35 would all be pretty high on that list. Very curious to hear how they drive, because I've heard mixed things, and I think you and I tend to have similar taste in cars. So the fact that you love driving it, and you said only really great things about the R35. That makes me excited. Corvette. What were other things on your list?
I had the GT3 RS.
I was also thinking about the Holy Trinity cars.
Oh,
I was exchanging some photos with a coworker or one of my employees who said he had a photo of a Bugatti Chiron. I was like, okay, that would be amazing to drive too. But I was like, what I was really oogling over back in the day was the 918.
Yeah.
And
that's a 10-year-old car now.
I pulled up photos of that car like in a parking lot. This guy just parked next to like a Nissan in Ohio, and I amazing car. I mean, any of the Holy Trinity cars, including the LaFerrari and the P1,
Yeah.
would be incredible to drive.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
How about,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, let's bring it back down to earth for a second, for, the wider audience. How about some like actually reasonably affordable
Oh,
cars?
hell yeah, dude. I'm all about that. I'm excited to modify my ND, really, because I think the ND in stock form is good for just cruising.
Yeah.
But to drive it harder, I think there's a lot to be unlocked there by modifying it.
Yeah.
What are some newer cars that are coming out in the more affordable range?
You know what? I thought about this morning, and I came to the conclusion that new cars are so uninteresting until you get into that higher price bracket. I think, like, I should say that there are some interesting, affordable new cars, but I feel like I've experienced basically all of them already.
Yeah, like the 8.6,
8.6, Civic Type R, Elantra N, yada yada yada. Like maybe you can go up to like $80,000 and include cars like the CT4V Blackwing, BMW M3, M2. But the number of cars in that sort of affordable segment, which is a very like controversial word nowadays, but it's grown so much. It's shrunk a lot since 10, 20 years ago. So it's easier to tick off that list and kind of be a little bit bored, and it's like, oh, I can only drive old cars now or like very expensive new cars.
I've never driven a 240. I like to drive a 240 and
Like a 240 SX.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to not driving someone else's 240, but just in general, I want to actually spend more time drifting in 2025 as well.
Okay.
So I've been spending more time in the sim rig. I need to get my Assetto Corsa dialed in, but the new Assetto Evo is coming out, and 240. I'm trying to think of other affordable cars I haven't driven that I would love to.
I mean, you haven't driven a whole lot of American cars, right? Have you ever driven a C7 Corvette
No.
or a C6 Corvette?
I think some of these cars I may have driven also, but like not in a review format and before the channel.
Okay.
So C7 my buddy had back in residency, but yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing.
Okay.
So even like then he got after the C7 he replaced it with I think it was an AMG GT, and that too,
Ooh,
like
damn.
I loved driving that car. I was very impressed. But we were just driving it on these city streets. I wasn't really pushing it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd be curious to review those too.
Because those are like the definition of bang for buck. Like you get like a proper C6 Z06 or even a base C7 and throw some mods on it, suspension, brakes and such, and it's one of the fastest cars you can buy.
Oh, one of my buddies just got a C5 and he said, hey, when you're down in LA, let's review it.
Oh,
so
that'd be fun. Yeah.
I think he got it for less than, I think it was like 17K.
That sounds about right. Yeah, you can pick up a base C5 for well under 20 nowadays. Okay, that's all I had on my topic list. Do you want to talk about some of the other things you had on your list?
Yeah. Let's actually cut it right here for a quick bio break.
Yeah,
and
sure.
then let's resume. So I've known you for a few years now, and before we met up in person, Benton actually reviewed my Scion FRS.
Yes.
Yeah, way back when. And maybe for like a year or two before that, I was watching his channel, and during these podcasts, I like to put myself in those shoes of back when I was watching Fenton as like when I didn't know him, just as a fan, right? So the questions that I would have from that perspective are things like, through reviewing cars, how has your enjoyment of cars changed, or your perspective of what you like or don't like in cars changed, or your own dream cars, how those have changed? So do you want to start with maybe like has your relationship to cars changed at all during the process?
Man, that's a good question. I'm trying to take myself back in time, say like 6, 8, 10 years, and think what my mindset on cars was back then and how it's changed. I think actually fundamentally a lot of the things I liked back then, given I had like a small fraction of the actual experience that I have now, it still carries forward to what I like now. Like if you asked me when I first got into cars, what were my priorities in a car that I wanted to like enjoy as a fun car, I would have told you straight off the bat, naturally aspirated, high revving, manual transmission with a really like slick, engagement, and rear wheel drive. Like those probably would have been my however many, like four criteria that I would tell you, like these are my absolute must-haves for the ideal like fun car. And that is still the case today. I think where my viewpoint has changed is that I'm much less rigid now in that viewpoint. Like I still prioritize those four things. That's exactly why I still own a 91 NSX, right? Outside of the nostalgia factor of that car. But I'm much more open to other things. Like I own a turbocharged front wheel drive, heavy, glorified Civic that I paid the most money I've ever paid for a car before. And I enjoy that car deeply. I really do. Like it is a car I can see myself owning as a daily and like potential backup track car for quite a while. And if you asked me like 10 years ago, I would have been like, absolutely not. Like, why would I want that? I used to be a lot more cynical, I think, back then as well.
You're telling me you're less cynical now? Oh my
Right?
God.
I think back then though, I was really like, man, like we're not getting any fun cars nowadays. Everything's turbo 4-cylinder.
Dude, the whole car community is this echo chamber of just negativity, and I get it. I understand why people are negative, but at the end of the day, you have to choose the truth that serves you, and if you can find the silver lining, you're just happier at the end of the day. I'm so grateful for cars like the GR86, the FRS, the Miata, and like, do I wish that there were more options available? Yeah, but
Yeah.
Porsche's still making awesome cars, and I hope to one day own some of these Porsche products.
I'm with you on that. I think we're still getting a lot of really cool cars out there, but where I'm a little just frustrated is that, again, like the selection that we have is narrowing, especially in the sort of like reasonably affordable price bracket. And I get that with inflation and such, like there's no such thing as a $20,000 fun car anymore. But if you do the math, it's something like a $30,000 car 10 years ago is now like a whatever 45, 50K car. But even if you do that, and then you look at what's out there that's brand new, there's only a handful of options. And that's the part, especially when you go manual transmission, right? And so that's the part that's kind of disappointing to me. But at the same time, there's more to cars than that. And that's where I'm trying to have a more open mind. Every sort of 6 months or year that passes, I'm being more open to what's out there. Like EVs in the past, I was like, why would I ever consider that as an enthusiast car? Like 7-8 years ago, that was my mindset. A couple weeks ago, I drove an Ioniq 5N for like the third time, and I was like, this is a fucking fun car. Like, not for all the traditional reasons, but there's still joy to be had, and there's still more learning to be experienced in cars beyond like what my old narrow mindset was. So
interesting. And I forget sometimes that you've been doing this for so long. You've actually been doing YouTube longer than I have. And I started my Mexico Insiders YouTube channel in end of 2016.
Yeah.
So I guess the way that, and I've only been doing the car channel for, I think almost more than 2 years now, but not quite 3.
Yeah.
The way that things have changed for me, when I was younger, I was willing to deprioritize engine. I went with an FRS, and I knew that steering and handling was the most important thing. And now, after driving more cars, engine has become more important. And I understand how, oh wow, this RS 4.0 and like driving certain cars that have amazing engines have convinced me how important that is, especially as we're going to this EV future. The other thing would be the importance of just having 2 separate cars, one for track, one for street. And I used to think that I would just get one car that could do both, because growing up, I guess I only ever imagined myself having one car or maybe a second car. And right now I own 3 cars. I have a CX-50, and a Mira, and a Mazda Miata. And after driving some cars like the GT4 RS or even the 991.2 GT3, so I drove 3 examples on track. One of them was stock, 2 were modified. And the 2 modified ones drove way better. Yeah. And that was because of the modifications. But then those modifications make them less livable day to day. So I feel like ideally I would have a track car and a street car. And they would be highly specialized. I think the Amira is a fantastic street car, but a lot of that pleasure would be removed if I started optimizing it for the track.
Yeah, hence why you got an ND3, right?
Yeah, that's going to be more of the track car, which I still need to modify. Okay, so let's go to dream cars. How have your attainable dream cars shifted over the years?
Oh, keyword attainable. Okay.
Because Because like these really big
Halo cars, like
these
man,
Halo
I'm
cars,
never
like,
getting
it's
a
like,
McLaren F1. Let's
it's
be
not even
real.
an interesting discussion because it's
Yeah.
just so abstract.
Yeah. I would say it hasn't changed much. Like, I get this question a lot, like for people who are not even necessarily into cars, but they find out that I have like a car YouTube channel and that I'm into cars. Like this happened actually last week at work because I work a tech job, like every other Bay Area person who's trying to make a decent living. Somehow the topic came up that I have a YouTube channel, and people asked me like, "Hey, what's your dream car?" And I probably for the last 5+ years, I've answered that question as I already have my dream car. Because yeah, it is a car I will never get rid of. Every time I've considered getting rid of, I wake up like the next day, I'm like, what are you even thinking? And I go for a drive and it's like, this experience cannot be replicated in any other car. I'm not saying it's better than every other car, but it is a unique experience that is special and nostalgic to me specifically, as it is for a lot of other owners. And so, that kind of is my attainable dream car.
Would you ever replace it with an NSX Type R?
Yeah. I mean,
like assuming in the future budget allows for it.
Yeah.
You say you would never get rid of it, but you might maybe replace it with a higher level example.
Yes, that is something I would definitely be open to doing.
Like it's not your car specifically; it's just that you want an NSX.
Correct. But also like there is something about the fact that it is my car specifically, and I specifically chose the mods that I put on that car for a reason, and it's very unique to like what I want in a car. That it would be kind of hard to replicate that, but obviously for something like a true Type R or like Type S JDM, like perfect Halo example, like that would be something that I would want to do. But outside of that, that car is staying forever.
I have some thoughts here. So the 991.2 GT3 stock owner, amazing guy, Will, and he was telling me how he has his own little car collection. He has maybe 5 cars, and one's a daily and the other 4 are enthusiast focused. And even that daily is like a Giulia, so a Giulia Quadrifoglio. So it's like, all right.
Damn, okay.
So he was telling me how his 991.2 GT3 is his keeper, and then he rotates the other cars.
Okay.
And he was telling me some of his other friends have even larger collections, and they just buy cars and they don't sell them. They buy cars that they love and they just keep them. And they very rarely ever get rid of anything.
Must be nice.
And that's very cost prohibitive for a lot of us. But it's also one of those things that, especially if I'm going to have a more attainable garage, let's say like I want an S2000 to be in that final garage. I would like my Amira to be in that final garage. I would like a 991.2 GT3 to be in that garage. But those are things that I have to plan for several years into the future. And then even having the garage space for multiple cars. A lot of these guys need to either expand the garages on their property if they have space for it, or have their cars off site.
Right.
Like Jimmy as an example, like he has to go drive to a warehouse to get his cars.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I'm toying with, but it's easy to have these big aspirations and dreams. It's a lot harder to make them a reality.
Well, also, okay, one thing that I have realized about myself, just in terms of how I like to own cars, is that simpler is better, in the sense that at one point, I was still renting a house with 3 other guys in San Jose, right? We had a 2-car garage, and my greedy ass was taking up both garage spots because no one else was a car person, right? And my very generous roommates were, kind enough to let me take both spots. But I had 3 cars at one point. I had an S2000, I had my NSX, and I had an E39 5 Series. And
that's a great lineup.
On paper, it was a great lineup, and I very much enjoyed it. But there were 3 ancient cars, and they all needed, maintenance. I had to change the oil.
I love the philosophy that you would always want to have one newer car, comfortable, reliable daily that has your Apple CarPlay.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a CX-50, and then, god damn it, I sold some stuff to a guy on Marketplace. Ends up being a really cool guy. We become friends, and he lets me sit in his GLS 63.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fucking Christ! Now
this
I
is
want to
nice.
up my CX-50.
Yeah, but I hear you.
One thing I also wanted to mention from earlier about perspectives shifting is I used to really think lowly of front-wheel drive vehicles. And one of my focuses with the car channel is to just be unfiltered and be authentic and just keep it real. I don't want to be like, oh, I got to do the PC thing. And I need to change my beliefs to make everyone happy. I just want to tell you guys what I'm experiencing. And the the one thing that convinced me front wheel drive cars are fun is driving Kevin's Integra.
Yeah.
Same day.
Type R. Yeah, DC2 Type R.
The same day as the 4.0, we drove that DC2. And that DC2 Type R was, I mean, he did a great job restoring it and even modifying it slightly, OEM plus. That is a truly fun vehicle. And I haven't driven other, at least not, I think there are other vehicles in that era from Honda that are phenomenal front wheel drive vehicles. But nothing modern has really tickled me for front wheel drive. And
I mean, you're never going to, I mean, I won't say never, but since that's called the golden era of Hondas for a reason, because that's when cars were super light. Like 3,000 pounds for a front wheel drive Honda back then was considered a pig. So everything was in that sort of 2,300 to 2,700 pound range. And then they had double wishbone.
Aspirated, high revving, double wishbone. They didn't go to McPherson Strut at the time.
Right. And they were affordable. Like you could pick up not a Type R, but Integra GSR, which was still an 8,000 RPM screamer with double wishbones. You could pick that car up for $6,000 about 7-8 years ago.
That's a lot of car.
Nowadays you can't even dream of finding one for that money.
Yeah.
What was I saying about, like, the simpler is better in the sense that, like, I have all these grand dreams about, how I would love to have like all these dedicated cars for different purposes and whatnot. But even just experiencing having 3 cars that needed oil changes and brakes and whatnot, like, and parking spaces here in the Bay Area where parking is very limited, it's like, man, I have to be very, very judicious about what I choose as a car and have to be realistic with myself on why I want it and what purpose it serves in my life. That's often why I'm like, I toy with the idea of selling the NSX, because it serves no practical purpose in my life other than giving me joy. But now I'm okay with that fact, and I know that is something that I can never give up.
Whereas before you wanted more utility?
Utility, right. So now I'm of the opinion that, like, for example, I would love a Lexus LC500, right? It's such a phenomenal car, but I have no purpose to own that, like no reason to own that car.
Yeah, and I know it's more GT and the V8 Vantage is more sports car, but dude, I would take the V8 Vantage.
Sure, I would love a V8 Vantage too, but it still ultimately serves absolutely no purpose in my life other than being like a time and money sink.
Yeah, I guess maybe you're more mature than I am, because to me, I'm like, I'm gonna eventually sell the Miata and get an S2000 and a V8 Vantage.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'll have 4 cars, and maybe the CX-50.
Yeah.
Won't be around anymore. I'll have something else as a daily.
Yeah.
Let me think if there's anything else I wanted to discuss here.
Did we fully flesh out that topic though? Like how your
it's one of those things
changed?
that I think it's one of those things that we're probably I would like to keep visiting in various ways.
Okay.
But I think that mostly addressed it.
Maybe I don't know if this is worth talking about, but like a few minutes on where we see our current priorities in terms of our own cars. Like what are our plans for our current cars, say next year?
Yeah, let's do that. So current plans for our own vehicles in 2025.
Yeah. This is a cool topic for me because I do have a perspective on this, given that I spent about 8 or 9 months of 2024 chasing a certain lap time goal at Laguna Seca in my Integra Type S without adding any additional performance impacting mods. So, I have the Öhlins, the tires and whatnot. And the first time I took it to Laguna with all of those parts, I did like a 140.7, and I thought that was a decent lap, but I still had room for improvement. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, because I'm at the cusp of sub 40, and I've never gone sub 40 at Laguna in my own car before. I've only done that in other people's cars with way more power, way more aero and whatnot. I thought that was a cool target to kind of, or goal to kind of try to achieve by year end. And through like many trials and tribulations where like I destroyed my tires by driving it too much on the street, or I burnt out my brake pads, I just wasn't able to do it until like 2 weeks ago, very last track day of the year. I decided to just send it, and I was able to do it. And that was kind of it's kind of silly, right? Because at the end of the day, what lap times don't really mean anything to me. Like, it's not adding anything to my life other than just like saying I did a sub 40, but I did it and it felt good. So now I'm at the point where it's like I either can start modifying my Type S in different ways to see what it'll do in terms of lap times. For example, I just took delivery of a Cobb Access port, so I'm going to be playing around with that, seeing how much can I push the limits of like front wheel drive on track with more power without actually losing performance and lap time. But then the other thing is I'm also getting close to the point where I'm going to retire the Type S as my primary track car, and I'll still keep it, but I'll consider getting a different dedicated track car. I think I've mentioned this a few times.
So a lot of it for you is focused on lap times at certain tracks, and then hitting those targets. And after that, okay, what's the next thing to work towards? And
I didn't used to have that goal, but through this last season, that's kind of how I've developed my track day experience.
That's awesome. I think I have an AIM Solo 2DL, which is literally still in the box. I need to set that up in the Miata. I've never really focused that much on lap times, and it's something that I want to start focusing on because I've always focused on, okay, how can I just become a better driver? And you can do that without necessarily focusing on lap times, but obviously lap times are a very objective way of measuring that. Becoming a faster driver. And I'm also doing a lot more sim racing. For those who do want to follow along, it's Jabal and Sim Racing is the channel. So it's just going to be live stream only, no like edits, no fancy stuff, just like me and buddies having conversations while doing iRacing or Assetto Corsa, things like that. So I'm very, very excited to actually follow your journey with like optimizing for lap times at certain tracks.
Yeah, it's fun because it's a different way. Because I do respect that the fact that you've you avoided lap timing for so long, because I think there is a large element of lap timing that can be more harmful than good in terms of just how you grow as a driver. Because you end up just like, I find myself doing this a lot. Like in my 139 lap, you'll see it once the video is out. But because I knew I was on target and I had a clear track ahead, you actually see my POV cam looking to my Garmin.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'm minus 0.3. Okay, I fucked up this corner.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I have my editors. I've done a lot of track videos with my FRS and GR86, and I have them go backwards and then actually, based on the video edit, find the frame where I cross the line and then run the lap time from there. So I can actually see, okay, am I getting faster and how consistent was I? Things like that, but not segment by segment or sector by sector.
Right.
And so I'm still like a little bit curious, but I haven't really had a timer in my car, an AIM Solo or a Garmin Catalyst.
Yeah. I totally lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Plans for 2025, the car,
right.
Car journey, car changes.
Yeah, so I don't know what I'm going to do in terms of a dedicated track car just yet. I have some thoughts out there. I'm not going to mention them just yet because I feel like I'd just be like shooting myself in the foot if it doesn't play out. But it's going to be rear-wheel drive. I'll put it that way. It's likely going to be manual, and it's not going to be a super expensive car. Like, I'm trying to keep it at a reasonable price, like, less than. My hope is that the running cost of the car over, like, say, a one track season should be, less than the cost I'm currently spending on my Integra. So
solid. Yeah, I need to modify my ND3 because right now it's bone stock.
You got to get on that, man.
Dude, my car has a dead battery right now because I haven't driven it in a month. Because like I split time and I just don't drive that car as often. So then I think that's part of the reason why I've pushed it off. But I need to really get on that, modify the car because I'm going to have a lot of joy from tracking it. I haven't tracked my own car much in the last year since when I sold the GR86 and replaced it with the Emira. I didn't really have a car I felt comfortable beating on. And the Emira, I don't think in stock form is optimized for the track, obviously. It's much more of a street optimized car. So Emira, I'm going to keep mostly stock because I've driven a couple modified examples. The shifter with the mods that the short shift kit, actually think it made it worse. The third cat delete, I think for me, given my preferences with volume, which is lower than the average car enthusiast, I actually think stock volume is better. Yeah. And when you're pushing it, even in stock, like it sounds great. I just don't want too much volume because I'm going to get a headache and whatever. Yeah. Just my, old man problems. So that's going to stay stock. Miata will be modified. Got to do the roll bar first. And from there, I'm thinking like maybe a stepwise progression of tracking it first pretty stock, just with a roll bar, and then adding coilovers, adding various things, and then telling you guys that journey, how the car is changing, and then measuring it with that AIM Solo 2DL, and maybe even having the telemetry to show you how I'm driving the car. So that's the plan. CX-50, I'm probably going to keep until the end of the year and then get rid of it, replace it with something else. But the dailies are, not going to be modified. They're just my, day-to-day boring vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm curious to see where you take the ND3 track journey, given that we'll be doing a lot of track days together here in California, Sonoma, Laguna, and I'm staff with Lightspeed track events, so I think we're planning to do a Button Willow event for the first time in 2025, which I will definitely prioritize doing that because I haven't been there since I think Black Friday 2021 was
That'd
the
be
last
great.
one.
And it's like 4 hours or three
and a half hours.
and maybe like 4.5 from Vegas. So like it's a good middle spot too.
Yeah, and I just because like now I'm on this thing of like, oh, I want to see what kind of lap times I can do with the Integra before I move on from it. I would love to do a sub 2. I've never done a sub 2 in my own car at Button Willow, but I've also never had like a fast car at Button Willow. So that might be fun. And then, yeah, I'd love to see like what you do with the mods. I think just dialing in that car, because we drove that modified ND2, which, that was like a full track build and way too hardcore compared to what you're looking to do. So
That was hilarious though. That car was a riot.
Yeah. So cool. That is our year-end 2024 wrap-up and recap of our respective YouTube channels. Go follow Kevin at Jabal and Cars. I will link his channel down in the video description. Hope you guys have enjoyed the last 12 months of our car journeys and all of our car reviews. Lots more to come in 2025. Happy holidays, guys, and we'll see you in the next year.